On Christmas, her mom's betrayal, called me a failure and mocked my job. When I defended myself, my fiancé said, "Respect my mom or get out." So I left. What if the person you loved most, the one you planned a future with, asked you to choose between your dignity and their family? I stood up from that Christmas dinner, my fiancé's icy words still ringing in my ears, apologize to my mother, or get out. So, I left. And what I found 3 days later shattered everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. My name is Daniel, and I'm 29. My hands are usually calloused, my back aching, from my job as a lineman. I climb poles in blizzards, wrestle with live wires, sometimes answering calls at 3 a.m. when a storm tears down half the power grid. It's dangerous work, the kind where a single mistake could cost you everything, but it pays the bills, and then some. I own my truck, have zero debt, and save a good chunk of my paycheck every month. I'm not rich, not by a long shot, but I keep the lights on for thousands of people, literally. And I never, ever thought that was something to be ashamed of. Chloe was incredible in so many ways. A graphic designer with genuine talent. She could conjure beauty from a blank screen. But beneath that creativity, there was this subtle crack in her confidence, a vulnerability I didn't truly grasp until I met her mother, Eleanor. Eleanor was the type of woman who smiled while plunging a knife in your back. Always impeccably dressed, perfectly composed, and forever ready with a concerned comment that landed like a heavy criticism. She had this way of making Chloe second-guess everything, her career, her apartment, even the men she dated. Over the 2 years Chloe and I had been together, I watched her shrink, just a little, every time Eleanor called. The warning signs were there, I won't pretend they weren't. But I believed love, coupled with firm boundaries, would be enough. Chloe would hang up, immediately launching into defenses of whatever her mother had just said. She's just worried, or she only wants the best for me, or her standards are just high. I learned to bite my tongue. Pushing back only made Chloe defensive, almost agitated. I remember a call, about 3 months before that Christmas. Eleanor spent 20 minutes tearing into Chloe's career choice, dismissing graphic design as a hobby, not a profession. After Chloe hung up, she spent the entire evening feverishly updating her portfolio, like she had to prove her worth to a phantom judge. I asked her why she let her mother get into her head like that. Chloe looked at me as if I'd suggested she stop breathing. She said Eleanor had sacrificed everything to raise her and Michael after their father left, and the least she could do was listen to her mother's advice. That should have been my cue to run, right then and there. But I loved Chloe, or at least, I loved the version of her that existed when her phone wasn't ringing. A week before Christmas, Chloe sat me down, giving me what I now realize was a pre-Christmas dinner warning she'd probably given to every guy before me. She said her mother could be difficult, that she might ask personal questions, and I should just smile and not take anything personally. When I asked what kind of questions, Chloe looked away, mumbling that Eleanor just liked to know who was in her daughter's life. I should have pressed harder. I should have demanded specifics. But I was confident in who I was, in what I did. I figured I could handle one dinner with a protective mother. Chloe even coached me on what to avoid. Don't mention I bought my truck used, don't say I was still renting. Eleanor had old-fashioned ideas about success, she said, and it was easier to just avoid certain subjects. The fact that I needed a script for a family dinner should have been a giant red flag, but I ignored it all. Christmas Eve. We drove to Eleanor's house, nestled in one of those perfect suburbs where every lawn looked manicured with tweezers, and every car in the driveway cost more than I made in a year. Chloe was silent the whole drive, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I asked if she was okay, she just nodded, saying, "Just try to make a good impression, please?" I told her I always did, which was true, in every other aspect of my life. I didn't realize I was walking into an ambush. Chloe's brother, Michael, was already there with his fiancée, Sarah. Michael was Eleanor's golden child. He worked in finance, wore suits that probably cost my monthly grocery bill, and effortlessly talked about money without ever uttering a single number. Sarah, though, gave me a look. A sympathetic, almost apologetic glance when we were introduced. She even pulled me aside, while everyone was getting drinks, whispering, "Just agree with whatever Eleanor says. It's not worth fighting." I didn't understand her then, but I thanked her anyway. Dinner started, fine. Eleanor had outdone herself with the decorations and the food. For the first hour, I actually thought Chloe had been overthinking it. We talked about safe topics, the weather, the amazing food, some anecdote about a neighbor's ridiculous Christmas lights. I actually started to relax. Eleanor even complimented my watch, nothing special, but it was my grandfather's, and for a second, I thought we were connecting. That was my mistake. Eleanor refilled her wine glass, then turned to me, that smile on her face that never quite reached her eyes. "So, Daniel," she purred, "what exactly do you do for work?" I told her I was a lineman. She tilted her head, like trying to place a forgotten word. "Oh, like a telephone repair person?" she asked, condescension barely veiled. I patiently explained I worked on power lines, the high-voltage transmission lines that kept electricity flowing to homes and businesses. Michael chimed in with something about essential workers being the backbone of society, which sounded supportive but felt deeply patronizing, like patting a dog on the head. Eleanor nodded slowly, then dropped the bomb, "And how much does a job like that pay?" The table went silent for a half-second before everyone pretended it was a perfectly normal question to ask someone you'd just met. Chloe's hand tightened on my knee under the table, a frantic warning. But I kept my voice steady. "Around $70,000 a year," I said. "Honest. Nothing to be ashamed of." Eleanor made that humming sound, neither agreement nor disagreement, just acknowledgement. "Then, is there room for growth in that field?" I explained I could move into management or specialize. The pay was solid, benefits good, and honestly, I liked the work. She nodded again, took another sip of wine, then stated, "It must be nice to have a simple job where you don't have to think too much." The silence that followed was deafening. Chloe's grip on my knee was now pure panic. Michael suddenly found his plate fascinating. Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear through the floorboards. My jaw clenched, but I kept my voice eerily calm. "Actually, Eleanor," I said, "the job requires constant problem-solving, deep technical knowledge, and split-second critical thinking. One wrong move, and I could die, or knock out power for an entire county." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively, as if brushing away smoke. "Oh, I didn't mean it as an insult, dear. Just that some people are built for physical work, and some for careers that require real education and intellectual capacity." I calmly mentioned my associate degree and multiple certifications, requiring years of training, but she'd already moved on. She moved on to the ring. Chloe's engagement ring. Specifically, how much I'd spent on it. Chloe tried to redirect, saying the ring was beautiful and that was all that mattered. But Eleanor talked right over her. "A ring is an investment in a woman's future, a symbol of what a man can provide." I always told Chloe never to settle for less than she deserved. The ring had cost me $4,000. A month's salary after taxes. I'd saved for 6 months to buy it, because I wanted Chloe to have something beautiful. I told Eleanor it was a personal question, and I'd rather not discuss finances at the dinner table, trying to be diplomatic. She laughed. "A man serious about providing for a family shouldn't be shy about discussing his financial capacity." Then she looked directly at me. Chloe could have had her pick of men. Men with real careers and real prospects. Doctors, lawyers. Men like Michael. "I just want to make sure you understand what you're marrying into." Chloe was raised with certain standards and expectations. Michael tried to change the subject, suggested dessert, but I was done being polite. I looked Eleanor dead in the eye. "I understand exactly what I'm marrying into," I said, my voice low but cutting. "A woman I love, who deserves respect. And maybe if you spent less time measuring people by their bank accounts, and more time recognizing that character and stability actually matter, you'd see I'm exactly the kind of man Chloe needs." Eleanor's face went instantly cold, like a light being switched off. The pleasant hostess mask evaporated. She set her wine glass down with terrifying precision, then asked Chloe, "Are you going to let him disrespect your mother like that, in her own home?" Chloe's head snapped between us, her face pale, eyes wide. I saw the exact moment she made her choice. That split second where she decided her mother's approval was worth more than my dignity. She turned to me, her voice shaking, but her words clear. "Daniel, you need to apologize to my mother, or leave." The words hung in the air, heavy, final. And I understood. This wasn't just about dinner, or insults, or even Eleanor. This was about every future holiday, every family gathering, every single moment where I'd be expected to smile and take it while Eleanor tore me apart. And Chloe would stand by and let it happen, because that's what she'd been trained to do her entire life. I pushed back my chair. Stood up. "Okay," I said. "Just, okay." Chloe's eyes went wider, like she'd expected me to argue, or grovel, or cave the way she always did. But I just grabbed my jacket from the chair and walked toward the door. As I was leaving, I heard Michael mutter something that sounded like, "Finally." When I glanced back, Sarah was staring at Chloe with a look of profound disappointment. It wasn't the first time this had happened, I realized. I heard Chloe calling my name as I reached my truck, her voice rising, desperate. But I didn't stop. I started the engine, pulled out of that perfect driveway. In my rearview mirror, she was still standing there, in the cold, without a jacket. And I felt nothing. Nothing but absolute clarity. That was the moment I finally understood who she would choose when it truly mattered. And it wasn't me. I drove home in silence. No radio. No calls. Just the hum of the highway and my own thoughts, growing louder with every mile. By the time I pulled into our apartment complex, my phone was a silent scream, 17 missed calls from Chloe, and a string of texts that started with frantic apologies and ended with bitter accusations. The first few were panicked, "Where are you? We need to talk." Then they shifted, "You embarrassed me. You know how my mother is." Finally, they turned angry, "You're being dramatic. If you'd just kept your mouth shut for one dinner." I read every single one, sitting in my truck in the parking lot. That's when it clicked. She wasn't sorry for what had happened. She was sorry I hadn't played along. The apartment felt alien when I walked in, like I was seeing it clearly for the first time. I realized how much of myself I'd been folding, twisting, trying to fit into Chloe's life. I sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the walls. And that's when I saw it. Chloe's laptop. Open on the coffee table, still logged into her email. I wasn't planning to snoop, but the screen was facing me. And there, plain as day, was a message from Eleanor. Subject, Daniel. My stomach dropped. I shouldn't have clicked it. But I did. The email chain went back months. What I read made everything make sickening sense, in the worst possible way. Eleanor had been sending Chloe regular emails about me. Detailed lists of my inadequacies. Blatant comparisons to other men Chloe could have dated. Links to articles about financial planning and marrying within your social class. But what truly shattered me were Chloe's responses. She wasn't defending me. She was agreeing with her mother. Saying she had concerns, too, but that I was nice enough, and she hoped she could encourage me to be more ambitious. Maybe, she wrote, after the wedding, she could push me toward a better career. There was one from 2 months ago, Eleanor asking point-blank if Chloe was sure about marrying me, or if she was just settling because she was getting older. Chloe's response? She loved me, but she understood Eleanor's concerns and was hoping I'd grow into the kind of provider she needed. I sat there, reading, feeling our entire relationship rewrite itself in real time. Every time Chloe had defended her mother's comments, every excuse she'd made for Eleanor's behavior? It wasn't because she was conflict avoidant. It was because she agreed with her mother. I was a project to her. Someone she was trying to fix. The worst part? Realizing she'd never, not once, seen me as enough. Chloe called again around midnight. This time, I answered. She was staying at Michael's place, her voice tight, controlled, the telltale sign she'd been crying but didn't want me to know. She said she needed space to think, that I'd put her in an impossible position, and maybe in a few days, when we both calmed down, we could talk about this like adults. I asked her, point blank, have you been emailing your mother about me behind my back? The silence on the other end was a deafening answer. She started to stammer, how did you know about that? I told her I'd seen the emails. All of them. She tried to explain, said it wasn't what it looked like, that she was just venting to her mother, that everyone complains about their partners sometimes. I asked her, does everyone tell their mother they're hoping their partner will become a different person after the wedding? She went quiet. Then she pivoted, accusing me of taking things out of context, of invading her privacy, saying if I loved her, I'd understand she was just working through her feelings. I told her, oh, I understand, Chloe. I understand perfectly. You never actually wanted to marry me. You wanted to marry the version of me you thought you could create. And I am done being a project. She started to argue, started to cry, but I hung up. That was it. 3 days of deafening silence followed. I spent every one of them planning my exit. I thought about proposing to Chloe, how I'd spent weeks planning the perfect moment. Took her to the beach at sunset, got down on one knee in the sand. She'd cried, said yes. Now, I realized she'd probably been picturing Eleanor's reaction the entire time, calculating whether I was acceptable enough. I called my buddy Ben, who owned a moving company. Told him I needed help, and I'd pay him double if he could come first thing in the morning. He showed up at dawn, truck idling. I had a system. Anything I'd paid for was mine. Anything clearly hers stayed. The couch I'd saved for. The TV I'd bought for football Sundays. The coffee maker, the gaming console, the kitchen table I'd refinished myself. All of it went into Ben's truck. I left her clothes, her art supplies, her laptop, all the designer bags and shoes. But I took back everything I'd contributed. The engagement ring was sitting in a small dish on the dresser. I pocketed it. That ring represented a future that was never, ever real. While packing up my tools from the closet, I found a folder tucked behind some of Chloe's old portfolios. Curiosity got the better of me. Inside were printed copies of the emails I'd seen, plus others I hadn't. Including one where Eleanor had offered to pay for Chloe's wedding to someone else if she'd break up with me before the engagement. Chloe had declined, but her response wasn't that she loved me too much to leave. It was that she'd already invested too much time in the relationship and wanted to see if I'd improve. My heart dropped to my stomach again. I took photos of those emails with my phone, not because I wanted to use them for revenge, but because I knew, deep down, Chloe would try to gaslight me later. I wanted proof of what I'd seen. Ben helped me move everything to my new apartment in one trip. As we were unloading, he asked what happened. I told him about the emails. He let out a long, low whistle. You dodged a bullet, man. A woman who talks about you like that to her mother will never truly respect you. The new place was smaller, quieter. And mine. That first night, I slept better than I had in months. On the third day, I sent Chloe a single text, you can go back to the apartment whenever you want. My keys in the mailbox. She responded an hour later with a wall of text. I didn't read most of it. She called 6 times. On the 7th, I answered. I told her I'd taken what was mine, that I was off the lease, and that I'd found the printed emails in the closet. She went silent, then started crying, saying I didn't understand, that she'd never meant for me to see those, that she was just confused and working through her feelings with her mother. I told her, my voice steel, Chloe, the problem isn't that I saw them. The problem is that you wrote them. And I finally understand. I was never going to be enough for you, because you didn't actually want me. You wanted someone else wearing my face. She demanded the ring back. No, I said. When you chose your mother over me at that dinner table, you gave up any claim to it. There was a long silence. Then she called me cruel, said she'd thought I just needed to cool off. I told her, that's the problem. You expected me to come crawling back, like every other time you or your mother criticized me. But you finally pushed too far. I told her to have a good life. And hung up. 2 weeks later, Chloe went back to the apartment and saw what I'd done. My phone exploded with messages, but I'd already blocked her number. She tried reaching out through mutual friends. I sent one group text, a simple message with screenshots of the most damning emails attached. No commentary. Just the proof. The messages stopped after that. Some decisions feel sudden, but they're really the result of 1,000 small compromises that finally hit their breaking point. That Christmas dinner wasn't the beginning of the end. It was just the moment I finally admitted what I'd been ignoring. Chloe had never actually loved me. She'd loved the idea of fixing me. The fallout from those emails was swift and brutal, at least for Chloe. When I sent those screenshots to the friends who'd been pressuring me to take her back, the narrative changed overnight. People started reaching out to apologize, saying they hadn't known the full story. A few admitted they'd always thought Chloe seemed calculating, but hadn't wanted to say anything. One friend told me that Michael, Chloe's brother, had actually called him. He said he was glad I'd left, that he'd watched Chloe do this to 2 other guys before me, and he was tired of watching his sister treat people like audition pieces for her perfect life. Apparently, Sarah had refused to be in the wedding party because she didn't think Chloe was marrying me for the right reasons. That sympathetic look she'd given me at dinner suddenly made a lot more sense. Work became my sanctuary. 3 months after the breakup, I got promoted to crew lead. The validation felt incredible. Not just because of the money, though that helped, but because it proved I was good at what I did, that my worth wasn't determined by Eleanor's standards or Chloe's secret shame. I moved into a better apartment, with a balcony where I could watch the sunrise with my coffee. Every single thing in it was something I'd chosen. 6 months out, I started dating again. I met Sophie at a friend's barbecue. She was a teacher. Funny, genuine, with this incredible ease about her that came from actually liking herself. When I told her what I did, she asked real questions, wanting to know about the technical side, the danger. And when I mentioned the breakup in passing, she said, anyone who needs their parents' approval to love someone isn't ready to be married. That's when I knew she was different. Christmas came around again. Sophie invited me to her parents' place. I was nervous, of course. But her dad, Tom, was a retired mechanic who genuinely asked about my truck. Her mom, Brenda, was a nurse who made fun of both of us for talking engines during dinner. When Tom asked about my job, really asked, and I explained the technical work we did, he just said, "That's good work. Important work." And I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was still tight. No qualifiers. No comparisons. Just respect. Life settled into something sustainable, work, Sophie, beers with Ben on Fridays. And no drama. Then, 13 months after that Christmas dinner, Chloe showed up at my door on a Tuesday night. She looked smaller than I remembered. Dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. She asked if we could talk. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. She started talking fast, rehearsed, telling me she'd cut Eleanor off, that she'd been in therapy, that she'd changed and realized she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. She pleaded, if you'd just give me another chance, I'll prove things could be different. I listened to all of it. And felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just the unwavering certainty that this chapter was definitively closed. I told her I was glad she was working on herself, but it didn't change anything for us. She started crying, asking what she could do. I realized she still didn't understand. This wasn't about her mother. It was about the emails. About the fact that she'd spent 2 years seeing me as a project, someone she was trying to fix into being acceptable. She asked if there was someone else. Yes, I said. Someone who respects me for who I am, from day one. Chloe's face crumpled. She asked if I'd ever really loved her. I told her I'd loved the version of her I thought existed. But that person was never real. She begged. Literally begged, said she'd do anything. I thought about Tom, Sophie's dad, saying that's good work. About my peaceful balcony mornings. About the peace I'd built for myself. And I said no. She stood there crying, then said I was making a mistake, that I'd regret this. I told her I wouldn't. Then she said something that caught me off guard. She said Michael had told her she was an idiot, that he tried to warn her I was the best thing that ever happened to her, and that Eleanor had already ruined 2 of Chloe's relationships before mine. She said Michael had actually apologized to Sarah on her behalf after that dinner, and Sarah had told him if he didn't stand up to his mother, their engagement was over. Apparently, Michael had finally confronted Eleanor, told her she'd destroyed Chloe's chance at happiness. Eleanor, of course, had blamed me, said I'd turned both her children against her. Chloe said she'd lost everything, her mother, her brother's respect, most of her friends after the emails got around. She'd moved back home, only to realize Eleanor was never going to change. She'd spent a year in therapy, undoing the damage. She just wanted me to know she finally understood what I'd been trying to tell her. I told her I appreciated her saying that, but it didn't change my answer. She asked about the ring one more time, said it would help her move on to let go of that last piece. I told her I'd sold it, which was partly true. I'd actually donated it to a charity auction for first responders. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and said she hoped I was happy. I told her I was. And I meant it. She left. I went back inside to find Sophie making tea. She handed me a mug, her eyes gentle, and said she was there if I wanted to talk. I kissed her, and told her I was good. A few months later, I heard through the grapevine that Eleanor had shown up at Michael's house, demanding to see Chloe. Michael had told her Chloe had moved to another state and didn't want contact. Eleanor, predictably, tried to blame the whole thing on me, said I'd poisoned her children against her. Michael had finally told her the truth, she'd spent years tearing Chloe down, and he was done watching it happen. Sarah had backed him up, and they'd gone no contact with Eleanor entirely. The last I heard, Chloe was doing okay. Working as a designer in Portland. She'd started posting on social media again, but this time it was just her work. No quotes about relationships or betrayal. Just art. I hoped she'd found some peace. As for me, I had everything I needed. The truth is, some people only show you who they truly are when things get hard. And Chloe showed me that I'd always be a project to her, someone to improve until I was acceptable to her mother. Walking away wasn't about punishment. It was about choosing myself. About refusing to spend my life trying to measure up to someone else's arbitrary standards. The day I walked out of Eleanor's house, I chose my own worth over someone else's approval. And I'd make that same choice every single time. Because the life you build trying to please people who will never be satisfied isn't a life worth living. This story still blows my mind sometimes. What would you have done in my shoes? Did I make the right call, or was there another way? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious to hear your perspectives.